Scoia'Tael is the last faction we're going to talk about. Scoia'Tael's faction identities have seen the biggest changes. Fewer cards are the same as in Scoia'Tael than any other faction, spiritually or otherwise. However, the tribal synergy is so strong, Scoia'Tael still feels extremely Scoia'Tael. Scoia'Tael has the strongest tribal synergy. You can see in my didn't change list before I go into it, there's only 6 on there. And one of them's Runestone. So there's that. However, they do so much with primal. They do so much with tribal stuff that their synergies feel very Scoia'Tael. And since the tribal effects create different artifacts, guys, it's been a long day. Create different effects. That means that the dwarf tribal deck plays different because it's dwarves, and that's the same as live Gwent. The elf archetype plays different because they're all elves, and that's the same. Plus, there are cards that care about Dryad still, and there are cards that care if you've mixed all the races at once. Cards like Beckenbauer that were shown on the dev stream, and cards like Isengrim's Council, which is a great flavor card. Isengrim uniting the Scoia'Tael kind of thing. Look at a random dwarf, elf, and dryad from your deck and play one for 11 provisions. It's a great tutor. Now, this is actually Scoia'Tael's tutor. Scoia'Tael doesn't really have a tutor like the other factions do, where monsters have the organic tutor and have cards that care about organic. Nilfgaard has tactic tutor and have cards like bronzes and in their core they care about tactics. Northern Realms has a spell tutor and just has a really strong control base, even though they don't care about spells so much. They just have a really strong control base with Ada, so that's kind of just how they care about that. And Kira is your spell tutor. Skellige is an alchemy-based tutor deck in which you have tutors for alchemy, graveyard tutors for alchemy, control elements that are really strong in alchemy, and graveyard interaction with discarding alchemy. So alchemy is just really, really strong with Skellige. Now, Scoia'Tael doesn't have a tutor like you'd think, oh, well, what's the last card that they didn't put in? Items. Well, items isn't a card type anymore, which means that there's no other special card type outside of generic special that Scoia'Tael can really make use of. Now, they do make use of this. There are a lot of cards that make use of specials in Scoia'Tael. So you have that aspect. But you also have their tribal being so strong that they're able to tutor tribal, boost tribal in hand. They can do a lot of in-hand buffing, but it's based on tribal very, very specifically. So being able to control your tribal aspects is very much the controlled tutoring aspect that's going to come into play when it comes to the very, very robust deck building that Scoia'Tael has between their tribal synergy and their other faction identities. And their other faction identities are hand buff, traps / ambush cards, artifacts, which traps are, and tribal, like I said, and boost. And boost. Boost is actually more important for Scoia'Tael than any other faction, but other factions do care about boost. So while that's important for Scoia'Tael, it's also important for Arena, because when you look up the word boost, believe me. Now you're only seeing, I'm in the deck builder, so I'm just going to go out and just show all cards. When you look up boost, you see cards from every faction. So Arena is going to be really strong with boosting and damaging because you have Scoia'Tael units that care about boosting, and you have Northern Realm units that care about boosting. The standout one being Trident Infantry. When this unit is boosted, damage an enemy by 1, and it's a very low cost card. And you have a lot of units that boost, and then you have a lot of units that damage, and you have cards that care about damage, like any of the Skellige units that care about Bloodthirst. You have a very, very strong core of Arena cards that all ping and can have synergistic benefit from that, or all boost, like a lot of them boost and synergistic value with that. You know, you look at your first draft, like maybe you draft like really expensive cards first, or you draft your bronze cards first, your gold cards first, your leader first, or whatever. Whatever you draft first really depends on the amount of value you're able to squeeze out of each unit. It's going to depend on the tribal, the synergy you have with damage, and the synergy you have with boosting. And I find this to be one of the best parts about thinking about Arena long term because of two things. One of the things is the forum worry, which I saw a lot of. The forum worry that cards were going to be uninteresting because they were all going to be boost this, damage this, number cards. So while you have a very strong selection of cards that deal damage and boost, and while those cards are radically different in the tribal support or the conditional situations in which they can provide that damage or boost or overall value to you, this actually creates for an extremely positive arena landscape where you're going to see a lot of cards that are, you know, cards that were worried to be uninteresting, boost, damage units that actually have unfounded and untold interfaction synergy that only exists in Arena. And within the first couple of drafts, because so many cards work with each other from either a boost, damage, or tribal situation or whatever other synergy you've already built into it, because more cards work like that, you're less likely to just be like on live Arena and just draft a done banner and just have this brick in your deck that sucks. So the worry of uninteresting cards being the more basic damage boost cards is actually what's going to be the lifeblood of very, very interesting Arena runs. Plus, these cards aren't even that uninteresting because I'm just going to pick a random one. Does this one care? Yeah. This is a card that boosts. It's a 4 strength Nilfgaard unit. It's a 4 provision cost Nilfgaard unit, so it's the cheapest of the cheap. 2 strength that boosts itself by 1 every time you play a deploy effect. So this card is not boring. This card boosts itself. That matters to a lot of different faction synergies. It's a soldier. That matters for a lot of different faction synergies. It cares about deploy. That's going to matter between a lot of different faction synergies. And that's just the start. Let's say you run this card and you've got really good deploy synergy. Well, guess what? Your marching orders is really good too, because this is likely going to be what marching orders pulls. That card is the same on live. Also, that's a tactic. Nilfgaard might want to use that. I'm just riffing these combos right now. Like, I'm not even trying. I didn't build like a web in my notebook. Now, I took a lot of notes. My dudes. I took like a lot of notes. But I just riffed that one off the dome, and that's just like an example. So I think that one of the bigger concerns from the community based on lack of information might actually be one of its biggest strengths, one of its saving graces for a very dull format on live, if I am speaking very frankly and honestly. This makes Future Arena very interesting to me. Okay. So that is my preface to talking about boosting, which is probably the most vanilla thing that you'd ever want your faction to care about. But Scoia'Tael, well, while there are other faction cards that do it, boost themselves or care about boosting, Scoia'Tael is the faction that does it the best, and it's really cool. So I'll go through a couple of examples that care about that. Is this one of them? Well, this is a card, and again, going through all the factions, we've also talked about how many of the cards are very cross synergy. So I talked about boosting artifacts, traps, ambush, elves, dwarves, like tribal synergy, that kind of stuff. All matters to Scoia'Tael. So you see a lot of Scoia'Tael cards that have multiple things matter to them. And you see really good Scoia'Tael cards come in at a super low rate of 4 provisions and still give you, 3 and 4 body cards with effects that are conditional, that work in synergy, are the core cards you want. So this card is a great elf card. This card is a great boost card. This card is a great trap card. And since traps are artifacts, this is a great artifact card. So that means that out of every single Scoia'Tael synergy, tribal, artifact, trap, and boost, and I guess ambush, because not all ambushes are traps, this card mingles with every single one of them while doing something very, very simple. I keep on saying this is like the quote-unquote best example of a thing, but I find it's very hard to find cards that are not a great example of a thing that is being done very well in Gwent. So this is just a Scoia'Tael card through and through. This is like the Nausicaa Brigade of Nilfgaard. It's like the Necker of monsters. This is like, you know, what are the really good Skellige drops? I can't remember. This is like that card. This is the card that gets you a lot of value, and you're going to play it in a lot of different decks as a 4 provision cost unit. So shout out to Elven Scout, going from one of the stupidest cards in Gwent to being a card that represents like everything you would ever want out of Scoia'Tael, you know, currently. And then you have just another really cool synergy card that cares about boost. So the thing about boosts, hey, I'd stop yelling. I'm going to kill my voice. Lavage-telling everybody. My dog, everybody. All right. So the thing about this card, Mahakam Defender, this is also a card that is super, super, super coy for Scoia'Tael, in my opinion. Because now you have a 6 provision unit, so it's a little higher costed. But it's 4 strength and it hits the board, and then every turn on turn end, this card gets boosted. So it grows every turn, and all you have to do is boost it once. So when we're talking about boosts now, I feel like it's important to talk about the leaders, because much like discard and Skellige, where you have 2 leaders that care about the graveyard, which means 2 leaders care about discard, which means you can play discard how you want. Scoia'Tael also has different boost leaders, but they're all different in their own way, and they all have their own strength. So Filavandrel is probably the best example of a card that would work with Mahakam Defender, or any card that cares if it's boosted, because it boosts everything in your hand. So wow, Mahakam Defender just become a really good engine for Filavandrel, as he nods in the premium, like as he's agreeing with me. He's like, yes. Look right there with the crazy eyes. It makes Mahakam Defender like a really good card, because that means it hits the board and the engine is active automatically. So there's that. Alternatively, nope, Ethne is not the same as I remember her. Alternatively, you have Bruver, which is a card that not only messes with your opponent's board state, which the value of is we're out to the jury on that one. I think the jury's out on that one is what I'm trying to say. The reason why is because there is a neutral 4 provision cost 4 strength card that moves row, and if moving row and messing with board state is really strong, that card's going to be way above range. But it also means that Bruver could be a really good card, because not only does it do that, it also damages a unit if it's an enemy, but it also boosts an ally if it's on your side, and you have 3 charges. So you have 3 boosts whenever you need it. So if you're doing a bunch of boosts, you can just bop one thing back, boost it by 6. Having a boost by 6 in your back pocket is going to be really important for a card I'll show you in a second. I'm just going to show like just one more boost, 2 more boosty boys here. But you have 2 leaders that support that. So yeah, you could play Filavandrel. You make sure the boost is on all your units. And again, Elven War Dancer is another example of a card that loves being boosted out of hand. Because this 5 provision unit that's at 3 strength, if it's already boosted when you play it, it gets the 3 damage ping, and it's 2 reach, which means that it's almost a 7 strength card, because you're playing it at 4 and you're getting 3. It's also tribal, so while you'll see 4 provision cards hit 7 in some factions, and even this faction, this card being an elf matters a lot more to Scoia'Tael than like something in Nilfgaard being a soldier. And again, that's an arena thing as well. But the elf tag is always going to probably be, in general, Scoia'Tael tribal units, which most of them are, do have that extra provision cost on some of the units. Not all of them. Like I said, one of the best. Where is Hawker Smuggler? Where is Hawker Smuggler? Oops, sorry guys. Hawker Smuggler, a 4-point unit, I forget. No. Well, I'll just use the example of Dwarven Agitator, because I think hand buff This is just another example of a super great like cross synergy card. This is a card that you can see even now, even here at 4 provision points. Tribal is taking what I feel is a value cost. Because this is a dwarf, it matters all the time. Because not only are you playing in a dwarf deck that hand buffs a dwarf, which cares about hand buff, which cares about dwarfs, which cares about boosts, right? But it is a net value. It's a 2-point. It's one of the slowest cards in Gwent. But being a dwarf, it automatically gets you that support. And there is the argument that because there is a hand limit in Gwent now, setup in round 1 is absolutely imperative. And when you can play low provision cards to set up future rounds for higher strength, you are in a great place to either 2-0 or set up for, you know, an evenly matched round where you just have a higher value than your opponent. Because this even makes bad cards good, right? This makes, when you buff in hand, it's so important. But we'll talk about hand buff. This is, okay, so Scoia'Tael, much like Northern Realms, has so much cross synergy. I mean, like Skellige as well. Honestly, all the factions have it. It's hard to really kind of touch on one single thing that the faction does like extremely well. You're always going to be mixing and matching, and Scoia'Tael for sure. But that means that for Scoia'Tael, if you want to play a dwarf deck, that means you have hand buff and boost, and maybe even ambush and trap and artifact support, depending on the tribe you pick. So if you pick dwarves, you might be more interested in hand buff because of the Dwarven Agitator, because he hand buffs. You might be, so we talked about boost, but let's talk about hand buff. Hand buff has a lot of awesome support for Scoia'Tael. Hand buff is alive and well. Hand buff was one of my favorite ways to play Scoia'Tael. The one thing about movement, I'll put this out there right now. Movement at this time does not seem supported as a really strong archetype, but I think that's because of how 2 rows are going to be kind of understood and how messing with your opponent's rows is going to be evaluated. So I kind of already said this. Movement is very, very sparse in the game. So Scoia'Tael doesn't have a movement-based archetype, but I think that's just fundamentally too strong based on the 2 rows. So I will miss a little bit of that because Dwarven Mercenary and Blue Mountain Elite and that new Sheldon deck were so awesome. Shoutouts to Molegion who showed me that one. But that's just not going to happen, but I think it's probably really good for the game. And there's a lot of other cool stuff you're doing. So buffing in your hand. Oh, I was talking about Hawker Smuggler. Duh. Did I actually think this was a 4 provision card? Hell no. It's one of the best bronzes you'll see in Scoia'Tael. Now, this card is so overpriced. This card is really, really overpriced, and I'll tell you why. You might say, damn, why isn't this card Vrya Dragoon? It's like the same effect. Why would they change the art? Well, I hope if you've been listening to me that the design team really wanted to review 1, flavor, and 2, tribal. So this card is very expensive for what it does, or is it? Because this card takes a hit on a lot of stuff. As a 7 strength bronze card, it is one of the most expensive bronze cards in the game. It's a 4 strength unit, a 4 strength human. Every turn on turn end, boost a random unit in your hand by 1. So, why would you play this card? Obviously, it cares about boost, cares about hand buff, right? But that's about it. Because it's evaluating hand buff, I think, properly. I don't think this card is overcosted. I think it's expensive for a reason. It values hand buff. It values boost. It's vulnerable enough, but it does it on turn end, and you can protect it because maybe you're playing boosty stuff like Brewer, or a lot of other cards that you're playing that boost cards to protect stuff, because Scoia'Tael loves its boosts. I am just mashing all my words together because I've spoken a lot in a row. But I hope what I'm trying to say is clear. But this card is no longer an elf. Arguably, the fact that it was an elf was not flavorful in the first place. The Hawkers in Witcher lore are humans that aid the Scoia'Tael, which means that a lot of them are human, which means why Pavko Gale, that was a legit Freudian slip. Why Pavko Gale is a human being in Scoia'Tael, even on live, but is talked about aiding the Scoia'Tael. This is very flavorful to Paul Berja as a human being, because he's a human male that loves the elves. So of course he would be like a hawker. He'd be like a hawker guy. So Paul or Pavko in the game as a human being respected as a Scoia'Tael unit is super flavorful. I'll check Paul's ability. Now, Hawker Smuggler being human and Hawker Support being human just matters from a flavor standpoint. But the fact that this is expensive is because the hand buff is going to be strong, and this also ticks a couple other boxes on synergy, but not Elven synergy. I'm just going to check Pavko, just in case I can find another tangent to go off on how good the design is. Well, the only thing I can look at here is I think Pavko doesn't have synergy with Tribal. Specifically, I didn't expect him to, but I was expecting him to have synergy with like the Hawker units. But Hawker Support, I think, does something with traps. But Pavko does stuff with traps. So traps are ambush cards that are also artifacts that are unique to Scoia'Tael, and there are a fair amount of them. There are a lot of cards that care about traps being placed on the board, and a lot of these traps are super frustrating because Scoia'Tael control is likely going to be playing traps and immune units. Pumpkin's your man on this one, and I'm actually really excited to look for it. Because you know what? I think Magic the Gathering has taught me something. Super quick tangent. Magic the Gathering has taught me that I love playing control. And I feel like I can draw more conclusions on value and removal in this game now that there are actually value propositions on putting these cards in the deck, that I can evaluate them as control cards and what they do and why it would be fairly priced for control. What are the threats in the game? What are the matchups that I care about? How good is my control? I love control. I'm going to go out there and just say that I think this update in Gwent is going to turn me into a control player, and I think that every faction has control supported. I think Ambush supports control. This card is just kind of good in general, and that's going to get you a lot of value in constant damage at a higher rate if you play traps. Also, at 6 strength, even though he's 9 provisions, Pavko Gale is fairly resilient, and since you're probably playing boosted cards, you are more likely to protect this unit as well. But that comes at the cost that if you're playing a protecting ability on Pavko, you're not playing a trap, so his ability is likely not ready. So that's kind of a cool balanced proposition, Pavko here. Thank you. So that's kind of how I feel about Pavko. But then the last Hawker card, just because I think that they've nailed the flavor so well. I wouldn't be surprised if the last Hawker card is trap related. It is. So Hawker Support is also correctly labeled as a human, as he is a Hawker. 5 provision cost unit at 3 strength. Deploy, boost an ally by 1. If there's an allied artifact, boost an ally by 3 instead. So this card has an effect vanilla, but if you're playing synergy, it's better. If you're playing artifacts, it's better. If you're playing traps, it's better. If you're playing traps, you're playing Hawkers because you're maybe playing Pavko. And I think that, and then Hawker, and Hawker Healer. Hawker Healer is an elf, but this is the elves that help the humans. So I think that this is probably fair. Works with boost, of course. Then Hawker Smuggler is just a good card that I think they needed to give to a human because the tribal support was so good. I mean, that's like a lot of different stuff. Thanks. La Vegetaliana keeping me hydrated on a big, big day. I mean, we talked about kind of all the stuff at once here for Scoia'Tael. Whoops, I went back out of the deck builder again. We talked about boost, hand buff, traps, artifact, tribal support, and the tribal support is actually so big and strong, that in itself is like 3 decks rolled into one that almost every leader can kind of support. The last card is talking about the control Scoia'Tael. I feel like because you have Francesca, which plays a special card from your graveyard, and that's any special card. That means Shoop. That means Scorch. That means Becker's Rock Slide. Whatever. She only gets 1 mulligan, but this is a great control leader. But on the other side, Ethna, who loses her ability but gets a more realistic ability for an Archer Dryad Queen of Broccolon. She also does a lot of damage, but because she gets 4 charges, she grooms a board very well for a Scorch. So you could make a case that Ethna and Francesca are both very good control leaders. Bruver still does damage, but cares more about boost. Philavandrel cares more about boost, but the cards that care more about boost are stronger. And I think that that's just, like, I see this intermingling synergy in every faction. If you're just tuning in, you get stuff like Ithling. Now we're on the extreme spectrum of good cards. Now we're going to go through the entire collection as a high overview. I'm going to see if I can get the entire collection done in half an hour to wrap up the deck builder portion of the stream. Ithling, right now, boost the Scoia'Tael unit in your hand by 4. You can pick the unit. You know how good this is? I'll show you how good this is. It's good. Well, not because of this card. I was actually meaning to click on Aglace, but Moran, Forest Child, is now a special card, which is 9 provisions. Shuffle an allied unit into the deck, and then play a unit with the same primary category from your deck and boost it by 2. So this is really interesting because it takes a card that might be a less interesting tribal card that has a really strong deploy effect, shuffles it back into your deck, and then replays a deck as well. And it plays it as well. So but that's not what I wanted to click on. I wanted to click on Aglace. Where is Aglace? Aglace is the same provision cost. Yeah, QG Dave. So just hold on. This is the last faction review. I will show traps because I haven't talked about Artifact and Ambush yet. And then I'm going to go through everything again, like, really quickly, so you can see, like, everything. Like, if you read the tooltips fast enough, there's so much to explore, guys, and I want to play games for you. So we're going to get through this here. Now, Aglace is an example of a card that really leans into the boosting archetype, but more so hand buff, as well as boosting on an order effect. This is like Thunderbolt Potion, which is a on-order effect that can be saved. That's also an artifact. Scoia'Tael cares about artifacts. So you have a lot of synergy because there are a lot of artifacts that boost. You also can boost in hand. You can boost a lot in hand. And when Aglace touches down, this is the closest card to Siri Nova we're going to see. This card is on my watch list. I think it might be undercosted because if you have last play, boom, this card is so strong. You can put a lot of boosts on it because I already showed you Ithling, and I already showed you Philavandrel, which boosts as well in hand. And I've also shown unreliable stuff like Hawk or Smuggler. Saskia isn't one of those cards. Those are all the cards. What am I forgetting? Oh, the neutral card. That's why I can't see it. Triss Butterfly. So Triss Butterfly is a card that I think is a very good neutral card that has been increased in cost since the last time I saw it and made random. So they basically wanted to make this super powerful effect closer to Scoia'Tael only with Ithling, but they gave neutral the ability to buff in hand as well. However, without having a choice, you have to play Triss later, and playing a 12 provision cost card for 5 strength is a little on the slow side. So if you want control, you play it late. But if you want, if you want control of what it does, you play it late. But if you want its value in a round where maybe the value doesn't matter as much, you want to play it early. So that's the interesting thing about this. But the other interesting thing about this is that Scoia'Tael can make such good use out of Aglace, and you can, much like Aguara can on live, control this buff on a unit. Also, a control archetype would play more special cards and less units, so you're more likely to buff the card you need to buff. Also, if the card you're buffing is an immune unit, which Scoia'Tael has a lot of, and this is for the people. This is for the people who loved old school control Scoia'Tael Scorch. There are a specific, more immune units in Scoia'Tael than any other faction, and that means that it caters to more control. Because in a control mirror, your units are untouchable. So you have Milva, who is immune, that boosts over time. Gabor, who can be played as immune or resilient, that boosts over time. You have Polly, that can boost or give immune. So like these cards are like super good. And you have Synthesis, which is immune when you play it at 8 strength. But once a game, on order, you can remove the immune status so you can buff it, and then it becomes immune again. Now, that doesn't make it any less susceptible to Scorch, but it sure makes it less susceptible to damage, which in a control landscape, you play spells that boost this unit. Like if you play a bunch of special cards, you can set up your hand to get your immune units boosted up, and then you go into round 3 with untouchable golds, just like Control Scoia'Tael used to be. And that, my friends, is very interesting and also something that's kind of on my watch list. Pumpkin will bust this archetype open, but I think he likes traps more right now. Oh, and also there is one more thing about immune. Avalok is also a neutral unit that on order gives a unit immune, which is another card that helps like really strong units that have ongoing effects, but also at 6 strength is a very tough unit to kill that's going to get its order off. That is very, very critical, potentially game breaking if given Zeal. So another card that's on my watch list. Any card that gets immune is on my watch list. Even the werewolves in monsters, the 4 provision 4 cost card that's immune and doesn't do anything else. I think that card might be better than, it might actually be undercosted. But then again, monsters deserve like really good low cost bronzes. It feels like swarmy and correct. Trap. Let's see here. I'll show the traps first. How are we going to do this? We look up artifact. Like it's weird. Like you can't sort by artifacts. You can't. I'll just find the traps. Because you can't really, I mean, the deck builder isn't like fully functional on search. But here is a trap. So the traps fall at various provision costs. I will be showing games shortly, my friends. I wanted to get this review out for the podcast, which we are still technically in. We're still technically in the podcast. As I'm getting more and more parched. I will be playing games. I might actually just go straight into playing a game and not overview. I think that the fact that everybody has access to the open PTR, I probably can go into games after this, which I think I'm going to do. But I promised so many times that I'd go over every single card, so I might just do it like rapid fire. So here's a trap. 5 provisions for an artifact you play face down on the board, as ambush units do. Sorry, it's not a unit, it's an artifact. After 3 turns, on turn start, this card will flip over and damage all the units on the enemy row with the most units by 2. That's a really good effect. It means that it cares about a long round. It's very strong. It doesn't care about what row your opponent is stacking. And if you actually want to like play a little bit of movement, you get extra value out of it as well. Additionally, you can play it early, and since it's an artifact, I believe you can play it on the turn you play it and just straight up use it as a 1 damage row-based, very specifically row-based ability. So it cares about row if you need to use it right away. It does also care about row as it resolves naturally, but you care less about where you put it in a longer round that you know is going to go. And it's an artifact. Things that care about artifacts interact with this. It is a trap, so things that interact with traps care about this. Incinerating Trap. 5 strength artifact. Flip over when your opponent plays a unit and damage that unit by 5. So very good control card, but you can use it as an order to just damage unit by 3. You have less control over this, but if your opponent is trying to play around it, you can still get value out of it if you just need that artifact on the board so you can start proccing your other artifact stuff. There are lots of traps, guys. Pitfall Trap. Ambush. Destroy the next unit your opponent plays. Serpent Trap. Destroy the next special card your opponent plays and cancel its ability. That's Moran, Forest Child. Mahakam Horn is a Teruvial type trap. So very similar to Teruvial, but it is not a unit that has its own value. So this unit is a nerf to Teruvial in that you can't buff it in hand before you play it, but arguably a buff because since traps are better, when traps are better, all traps are better. So the bamboozle potential is more alive than it's ever been in Scoia'Tael because of the synergy with traps and the synergy with artifacts. And there are neutral traps. Believe it or not. There are neutral ambushes. I'm lying. There's neutral artifact. Wait, hold on. Is there not a neutral ambush? I mean... No. Sorry. There's not a neutral ambush, but to give you an example of an artifact that Scoia'Tael might care about, here's one. Because Scoia'Tael does have support for artifacts. They have things that care about artifacts. And Scoia'Tael seems like it's going to be really strong in control. And artifact Scoia'Tael seems like one of the ways you can play control Scoia'Tael. So at 7 provision point, Black Blood is an artifact. The next time an enemy is boosted, destroy it, along with this card. So there's that. But that's a neutral card. Now... there are also cards that care about artifacts on the board. The Pyrotechnician destroys an artifact and damages a unit by 2 and can do this every turn, which is really, really, really strong. First of all, because I think that's a pretty great rate if you're playing a trap artifact dwarf list. So that's how all these things go together to make the best unit of this. But the traps don't have any value on the board, so this kind of gives you value for your traps after your traps already get value. So Pyrotechnician is core in a trap-based deck. Hawker support is just automatically made better if there's a trap in play or an artifact in play. Whether or not that's good enough, I'm not sure. I think this might be a pretty high-costed card given that it's not a dwarf or elf tribal. Ryad Sappers destroys an artifact, so this is what tech looks like. But you probably have an elf in your hand if you're doing elf synergy, but not necessarily. Dual Pathetic Barometer also destroys an artifact. This destroys an ally artifact and gives you a 4-point ping. It's a deploy effect only, so you can only do it once. And it's really kind of only getting 7 for 7. But at the same time, it's an elf, so there's a little extra value on that as well. Plus, it gives you value when your artifact has already expended the value and arguably already got its money's worth. So you get 7 for 7, which is a removal effect and tribal. I think Dual Pathetic Bomber is overpriced by 1 personally, because I think that you can't put too much value on giving the artifact extra value if it's not really extra value, because the bomber is, you know, not a lot of extra added strength. Because you can get, like I said, like this card can hit 7 and this card can hit 7, and they're both, like, one's more expensive than the other. But this card is also an elf, and that's different. This card being low strength obviously caters to more, with a higher removal base and lower strength, it caters to control more. So, you know, there's that, and traps cater to control more. Stuff like that. Finally, Ida Amin is a 8 provision card, 4 strength card that destroys an artifact or boosts the unit by 3. I mean, you never want to destroy your own artifact with this, but she has like a backup plan of a boost, and boosting is pretty good. So this is actually really good tech, because Scoia'Tael is either going to use this for artifact removal, or it's going to get a lot of value out of the boost. It pays the premium cost for the flexibility. Another great result of the provision cost, because the flexible cards that can do more for you are highly costed. And I think the best example of that is actually Shoop's Big Adventure. Probably a very controversial card in general. And I think it's not working as intended, because I believe right now Francesca can play it twice, but it seems like it's specifically supposed to be doomed. So, like, you shouldn't be able to play it from the graveyard. Francesca being the new Ethna, if you're just tuning in. So this seems like you're not supposed to be able to play it twice, but I do believe on this server, or on this version and build, you can, because I think it understands these Shoops differently. Don't quote me on it, and it could have been fixed, because Tactical Advantage also wasn't immune right away. LOL, talking about artifact. I get you. Shoop, just in general, though, has a roughly a 12-point value, but has so many different modes that it can get you... you can't right-click on this, but, I mean, I'm sure there's somebody who's already done the research here. It is... The tooltip is missing also for Shoop, but the tooltip is the same if you have one of Send Shoop on an adventure. So this card is the same tooltip in that the tooltip doesn't really give you... I think they're probably working on this. There was a build where this tooltip was correct. But you send Shoop on an adventure. Wait. Oh, it just isn't showing up here. But like the Mage, Hunter, and Knight are all going to get you similar value. The Mage does more like removal-based spell, row effect stuff. Hunter does more like removal-based reshuffling, damage stuff. And the Knight is... I mean, they're all kind of roughly the same, but when you really get to know this card just offers you like just a whole bunch of flexibility and does not feel at all broken at a 13 provision cost. Just doesn't seem like... It seems like you're paying a price for it. My friends, we talked about boosting artifacts, traps, boosting hand buff, traps, artifacts, tribal, and the details of tribal. We looked at all the tribes, and we looked at all of Scoia'Tael. And now just the really short list about things that didn't change. Also, one thing that isn't on this list is the Serpent Trap, which is very similar to... Like, Incinerating Trap is very similar to Moran, and Serpent Trap is very similar to Moran Call of the Forest. So those aren't on this list. But also, Scoia'Tael Neophyte is very similar to Half-Elf Hunter. Dwarven Skirmisher is spiritually the same, boosting when it damages a unit that survives. Dual-Bothanus Sentry is very similar to... I can't remember the name of the card right now, but spiritually it's kind of like an Unga-type unit that... Oh, wait. Hawker Smuggler. Sorry, Hawker Smuggler. So I guess they... Yeah, Hawker Smuggler. The Runestone, of course, we talked about Runestones. There's Hawker Smuggler, which is spiritually the same as the Via Dragoon. Kieran is spiritually the same, moving and locking. But other than that, Scoia'Tael just has a whole slew of new stuff to explore. Really, really interesting stuff.